I just have to go right in when he does that kick and he hits the mat, and then Johnny Lawrence is out. His whole life is kind of, he gets knocked into the future. It's almost like he gets knocked in that moment. That moment is continued into the future.
Right. He gets knocked down and he never gets up.
Yeah, like it's frozen, and then he somehow, we talk about traveling through time. That moment is frozen and kind of just gets pushed all the way up into 2018 when the show started.
So that's how many years? That's like 36 years or something like that, if I did the math correctly. But yeah, I like that how they transitioned that. They transitioned that very well. Where it's like he got knocked down, face down, and he stayed face down through the next 3 decades.
Stayed face down.
Yeah.
When you get knocked down, don't stay face down. Right.
It's all a matter of not how many, not how hard you can hit, but how hard you can get hit and continue on or get back up. That's a little paraphrase, but that's the idea.
And why I think it's so cool the way they did that setup there, it really stands up for me now when they're, so much further along in the show. It stands up because it's like they just did that so well that I remember when I first saw that, I did not expect it to transition that way into 2018.
Yeah, and I like how he wakes up, he grabs the beer. That's his like little morning coffee, his beer. He's watching his old like box TV. He's got a microwavable breakfast. All these things. It's as if like he's still, everything in his life represents just no sense of progression. He's just stuck. It's all old news, old things. Nothing has ever, like, there's been no growth in his life. He's just stagnant.
He hasn't tried many new things.
Right. He's like holding on to the past.
And he knows what he likes. He knows what he's comfortable with.
Right. Which is the dangerous part there. He got comfortable. He lost, and then I think he used that as an excuse to just be where he's at. And it kind of got the best of him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to think, like, what stays with us from our past.
Right.
That's something kind of crazy to think about sometimes. Like, we all have those things that we can look at that we maybe need to let go of in our lives.
Right.
Something that we just need to go, that's not me anymore. That was back then. It's not now. But it still kind of crops up.
Exactly. I noticed that in my own life. It's, when you're really growing, you start to move on from like past maybe experiences or past things you used to take part in, and they just kind of become obsolete in your mind. There's not that emotional connection to it anymore. But a lot of the times there can be things, even when you feel you've moved on, they can kind of come back up and be like, oh, I missed that, or I missed this, where it's almost can be used as like a connection to the past, or something you miss, or something that maybe you don't have anymore. And I think it can also be used as a way to keep yourself in this comfort zone. And I think if you have those things, which I know I do, you have to be careful with those. Like, don't get too entrapped in those things.
Well, you know what? That's so cool that you say that, because for me, it's like when I watch Cobra Kai, it brings back memories of watching The Karate Kid growing up, especially the first movie.
Right.
And it brings back just kind of the way I felt about things at that age, as a kid watching martial arts movies and being stoked. Let's go rent that at the video store and things like that. So really reflecting on that kind of brings that back. And like you're saying, sometimes we go, oh, well, I've moved on from some of those things, but there's something in reconnecting to what we loved about those things, right? That is also, it feels very kind of grounding. It kind of reminds you of just maybe a simpler time or how you looked at things.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. I was thinking there's positives that you can get out of reflecting on the past as well. Sometimes there's things we may need to ultimately let go of, you might say, but in doing that, we can find that one of the reasons that maybe we hold on to them is that there are things that are good about it that if we don't really dive into it and look at what those things are, we might not be able to take the good and then leave the bad behind.
Right. I agree. Yeah, you got to have a a history to remember, to know what was done right, what was done wrong, memories, experiences, wisdom.
Yeah.
All the wisdom you gain from things you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just things to look back on. It's interesting how life works that way. It's like everything is how we talk about before, like the only time that exists, the only moment that really exists is now. But there's still all these memories we have and the thoughts of the future. And we're kind of like in this weird in-between, which we call the present.
Well, and that brings me back to when Johnny is driving in the car and he's reliving all those memories toward the end of the episode.
Right.
Or maybe 3/4 of the way through. And everything's flooding back. He's living in that past.
Yeah.
Right. He just wants to escape, and he breaks the TV, gets
Right.
in the car, and it's like, yet the life won't allow him to do that. It's kind of the point that you were making when we were watching it.
Right.
Is that he just wants to kind of live in that, but he keeps getting like kind of it's like he keeps getting zapped out of that. If he's a fish in a fish tank, suddenly the car hits. He gets the girl's car hits him, and it's like he's shocked. He can't just like happily marinate in his past psychosis.
Yeah. Right. Life, whatever you want to call it, is like forcing him out of that. He just wants to be almost just step away and distant and detached from the world as much as possible, it seems like. But then the world won't let him do that. It's like boom, crash, boom, your car's in your arch nemesis's shop. This annoying kid is pestering
There's
you.
one annoying kid pestering him, and then Daniel's daughter is the one she wasn't the one driving the car.
Right.
So even though he looks at it and goes, "Oh my gosh, she's the one who, one of the girls that was there that
Right.
in that car that hit my car," but in her defense, she was just a passenger,
Right.
and it was kind of her less mature friend who's kind of
The one texting and
not
driving.
paying attention.
Yeah.
But still, two kids are kind of okay. He's already like, he says, "I'm not really sure I should be around kids right now," because there's three things that he doesn't have a good track record with Samantha Larusso already.
Right.
He doesn't have a great track record with Miguel from the beginning.
Right.
And then he beats up a bunch of kids in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven.
Oh yeah.
Was it a 7-Eleven or was it a Quickie-Mart or some kind of?
Either or.
So he's not your happy adult role model.
Not at all. And it was interesting. Because I felt, even just watching the show, as he was in the car dealership, the Larusso Car Dealership, I could just totally feel, even just through the TV, like his energy from that.
Yeah.
Because I'm very familiar with how he was feeling in that moment. Because when I was younger, I know I used to feel a lot of, I would say, jealousy and anger, irritation, even towards others, because I felt like, why are they doing so good and I'm not? Like what's wrong with me? Like what am I not doing right? And it kind of creates this resentment. Like he was just in this deep state of resentment in that moment, and just shame, in a way. I could totally feel that. Like in that moment, as I was watching, I was like, I know exactly like how his whole spirit and body is feeling right now. And it's just this like where you're in that moment and you feel like, okay, it's just make this end. It's just one thing, the next thing. First, he's trying to get his car out of the shop. Then he gets, stopped by the one guy he doesn't want to talk to. And then next thing, the guy's daughter comes up. And then he has the guys who he works with come over and talk to him. It's just like...
Yeah. When I first watched this, I don't think I looked at it from Johnny Lawrence's perspective.
Yeah.
Also, think about how, in a way, he's such a cornerstone, because if his character would have evolved over all the years before this episode, you wouldn't really have a show.
Right.
So much of it is based on this idea that it's these characters that we knew in the original movie, and then now there's something that's a foundation, and Johnny Lawrence is still kind of that. He is such that character that what I feel like is it's going to bring out, says this interesting thing, which relates to what we were saying a minute ago, which is like, you still are who you are. You still are who you've been. So even though we change and we go, okay, I've let go of the past, there are certain things about us that we're always going to be us.
There's always going to be a piece of us, whether they're dormant or active in a way. And that's kind of interesting. I've heard multiple people say on like podcasts and whatnot, how there's a lot of things that like parts of us, pieces of us, aspects of our personality or our genetics that we have that we can work on and work with, but we can't really change them. We can just kind of become a master of them and learn how to use them to our advantage or work around them in some way, shape, or form. I think a lot of those things too, having those maybe say what you would call a less desirable trait, whether it's someone in a movie or our own selves, you can use those. And if you can become masterful of those and really self-aware, you can actually make those weaknesses your strengths.
Yeah.
In a way.
A lot of times we might ask ourselves like, okay, have I moved on? Okay, I've moved on since certain years. Okay, that was a long time ago now. So much has changed in my life, right?
Right.
So as much as you think you've changed, have you changed as much as you actually think you have?
Yeah, right. I think a lot of that is you got to really be so, kind of like I was just saying, you kind of got to be very, very honest with yourself. You have to look at yourself and your life from like a third party perspective and really be like, okay, what have I changed? Do I still think this way, act this way, have these habits, whatever it may be, do these things that I know I shouldn't be doing? I think a good way to know is how you feel, like your emotions. And when you think about certain things, do you get like an emotional response to things, like whether it's good or bad, to where it's maybe you're trying to quit a certain habit of, whatever it may be. If you think about that habit, say it's something you were addicted to. If you think about that thing and you get like an emotional, like almost physical response, then it's like, okay, I probably haven't changed. But if you think about that thing and it kind of, there's no physical or physiological response to it, to where you're just steady, then it's like, oh, I think I have changed, because there's no reaction that my body is having to the thought or the idea of that thing.
Well, and what I think is interesting in the scene where Johnny gets in a fight with the kids, he's not trying to spark that fight. He's
Right.
not trying to, he's just trying to, he spends at least a minute not engaging.
Right.
So even though he can get caught in these spirals, he's not like a bad guy inherently where he's trying to look for those things, but it's like they find him somehow.
Yeah. It's like he's literally, I think he's in a way attracting all those things in his life, because he's in this state of just almost resentment towards himself and shame, which is what the vibe I got from the first episode. That it's just, he's just attracting these things that are just going to keep throwing that feeling in his face, Well,
and to be fair, when I look at the fight that he had, the way he was being doesn't fit into today's world.
Yeah.
Just going and just getting in a brawl kind of thing right there.
Yeah.
It's like there's the Miyagi-Do way, which we're going to get into as the episodes go, where it's more about just defense and maybe just deactivating the opponent, right?
Right.
And not actually trying to kind of like, just lay him flat or something like that. Whereas Johnny Lawrence is a little bit more like a bulldozer. He just goes in and he just does stuff.
Right.
But he's responding. He's not trying to pick the fight.
Yeah.
A lot of times.
Right.
So I think it's interesting to think about how, in some ways, and I think it's worth it to mention this, in some ways he's protecting Miguel. He's doing it in a way that might not be the most mature, you might say,
Right.
if you're kind of looking at the spectrum of the different dojos and things like that. But he's not just trying to hurt people. He was actually doing something to help the person who is in need.
Right.
Yet, in the end, he gets pepper sprayed.
Exactly. Yeah, I know what you mean. This wasn't like a personal thing for him necessarily.
Yeah, I guess
It
what
was
I'm trying to
kind of
say is it's just a nuanced story.
Yeah,
right.
right,
And it's
exactly.
worth saying that because it's like, okay, yeah, there's these shades of detail. It's worth looking at that because it's like, wow, yeah, that's not really the best way to be in 2018 when this came out. But
Yeah.
he's just trying to eat a pizza. Like, there's something
Yeah.
about it where it is an interesting, the whole setting, the way they did that allows you to reflect on our actions. And there might be the Miyagi-Do way, which is I'm engaging, but I am going to very much just try to be using this for defense.
Yeah, deflect.
Or there's a little bit more of like the Cobra Kai where it's like, hey, well, they started it. I'm just going to go in.
Yeah.
Whereas that's still not an excuse for law officials who are going to come in and pepper spray you,
It's
right?
like fighting fire with fire versus fighting fire with water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Certain things are not necessarily all good and certain things are not necessarily all bad, right?
Yeah. Right.
But when it really comes down to it, it's like that's when you think of martial arts and things like that, it starts to kind of bring in these larger questions though as well. That it's like, just because somebody else, like you're talking about the vibration that he's in, just because somebody else is bringing a certain vibration and wants to create a fight.
Yeah.
Well, does that mean that in our response we need to, actually engage in a certain way and go in tune with their vibration of actual, conflict?
Right.
Or, are there choices to, and those are the things that Daniel learned in his style of martial arts. So it kind of sets up these things, but it's interesting because, yeah, by like really looking at it this way, it takes you into the 80s, like you're talking about. It's a little bit where it's not 100% accurate to how things are today, but yet then you're seeing this play out by the rules of today. And then when something happens that actually shows what would really happen if you got into a fight like that,
Yeah.
and then suddenly you'd be thrown in jail,
Right.
and then you'd have to sleep it off. It's like, so it's this kind of thing where you feel like you're in a movie. You feel like you're in a
Right.
movie for a second,
Yeah.
but then you're seeing the rerepercussions that would happen in real life. That you
Yeah,
a lot of times you
exactly.
don't see that in the movie.
Exactly.
In the movie, it still stays in the movie world.
That's they did that on purpose, I think, in a way. These things are happening as if they're still in the 80s, like it's no big deal. The repercussion of those events are 2018 repercussions.
Yeah.
Versus 1982, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, all the same kinds of things happen, even though it's now. It is interesting to see that he's kind of trudging along.
It ended right where he was now Miguel? Is it the kid's
Starting
name?
to train Miguel.
Starting to train Miguel, pouring out his beer from the trash can.
And looking for the check.
Opening
instead.
up the gym. Yep. So that was kind of he finally decided to say, like, F it. It's time to make a change. In a way, like he got that check, took what was given to him, finally just accepted like what was his life, and said, all right, well, what are we gonna do with it? Finally, all these things that kept smacking him in the face, finally decided to respond to those things rather than just hide away, in a sense. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. Because it seemed like all these things were happening and all his reaction was just kind of take it and then just continue like whatever he's doing. Like he's getting smacked, hit, poked at, annoyed, spit at, and then but he just keeps walking as if it's not happening. And finally he's had enough at the end of the episode where it's like, all right, that's it. You got the check, open the gym. He's like, I'm training you. I'm not your karate teacher. I'm your sensei. We're going to do this, blah, blah, blah. And finally decided to take responsibility, I suppose, for his life. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's neat how within one episode you can kind of set everything up that way.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, for the first episode, season 1, episode 1. Not bad. Not too shabby.
Yeah, and introduce the characters that we know, but introduce them in a slightly different way. And I know you haven't watched all of the old stuff.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like you're seeing these tendencies in these characters, but then you're seeing them played out.
Right.
So it's kind of like, okay, wait, if they still had these tendencies now, what would happen?
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. And so that is an interesting experiment to kind of look at and to think of ourselves too, that what does it take for us to change?
Right. Yeah, really, what does it take? And I think with a lot of these things, it's the world is going to keep, you're going to keep experiencing the same events over and over in your life, whether that's good or bad. And it's like the good ones, it's like, okay, good. Like, let's just keep letting this happen, and it's just going to keep getting better. Keep getting better. If good things are happening, keep doing what you're doing, and they're going to keep getting better. But if bad things are happening, the world is going to keep throwing that at you. But it's going to get the punch. It's going to start off with like a tap. Then it's going to be like a poke. Then it's going to be a slap. Then it's going to be a punch. Then it's going to be like I'm going to throw the whole kitchen sink at you until you make a change, you know? Which I think is a pattern that will happen. I know it happened to me for a while, and a pattern that will happen to a lot of people where they kind of just get into a downward spiral, which is kind of what Johnny was. That was his whole life, was a downward spiral. But I think what they did was kind of take that downward spiral, and it took us right into the deep pits of it, where it's just smacking him like 5 times every day.
He was in the spin cycle.
Yeah, he was in the spin cycle. It was just getting tickets, getting crashed into, getting arrested, Yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally, he just decided to break out of that. Because he had the kitchen sink and everything else thrown at him. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's reconnecting with kind of like the spark of his inspiration.
Right.
For teaching martial arts.
And maybe, now he can't do it himself, but he can use the outlet of teaching others to not only help others, but help himself too.
Yeah, and he may not have thought it through very much at all, right? I'm kind of putting it in kind of a little summary, but it's like there's all these voices. He's still hearing the voice of Kreese coming in.
Yeah.
Because Kreese is saying, you're a loser and all those kinds of things. And then he's, still seeing the visions of Daniel and his girl. And so it's like all these things, the voices, the images, they're kind of like these ghosts. And I think it's interesting he's got to also listen to his own voice. He listens to like his own, but he sees it in the movie. The movie has a little scene where the tape that's being played back says you have the touch, right? So that kind of gets him thinking about that, and then he starts digging deep and then listening to himself as well.
Exactly. Yeah, he has this consciousness telling him like all these things. It's like screaming out to him like, you got to do something, but he decides to just let it kind of eat away at him slowly. But then it finally gets painful enough.
Yeah, and all the voices that are pushing him, all the things that are pushing him, they're not pushing him toward what he really wants to do. They're pushing him other ways, other directions.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm in the spin cycle. I can't do that anymore, right? I'm getting knocked every way. The only way out is through.
Yep, exactly.
And it's doing your path, your trajectory.
Yeah. And we caught the beginning, the beginning phase of that.
Yeah, we caught the beginning phase. So he's now playing a new card in his deck. He's no longer playing the ace card as a degenerate. It's like he had to look to see what else is in him, and that's the sensei card.
That's right. He's restarting. Maybe he's an ace at being a degenerate, but he's restarting his life maybe off as a 2, depending on what game you're playing, and now he's gonna work his way up.
And he's going to work his
back
way
to that
back
ace. I don't know. Ace sensei. Sensei. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to get good. So thanks for joining us on this first one. This is a great way to kick this off and really get a chance to get back into where it all started with Cobra Kai. So I think we got a lot in store. I think we're just scratching the surface.
Oh yeah. We're just scratching the surface of that Pontiac.
We're just bouncing up from rock bottom is what's going on.
It is. We're on that bounce right now. We're about to fly all the way up.
Yeah.
Yep. We're about to wax on, wax off.
So it's almost like that kick. That kick he's still recovering from the kick.
Right.
And it's only by digging deep inside that he can then kind of go into episode 2. So this is a great way to take us into episode 2. Definitely a good start. Definitely proving that Cobra Kai has something great in that first episode. And that's what we're going to be assessing as we go forward is, okay, does it still hold up? Do these early episodes really have that magic that they seem to have the first time around?
Right. We shall see.
So stick around and we'll see you in the next one.